Hi, everyone. This is the next in our series of Compressed Air Challenge interviews of superstars of compressed air. I'm Ron Marshall. I'm the Compressed Air Challenge Training and Marketing Coordinator. And we're recording this series of interviews to give people a glimpse of the steps needed to become successful in the compressed air industry. I have with me today Joe Ghislain, one of the original founders of the CAC material, and he's still a very important part of the organization today. Joe, would you be able to tell everyone about yourself? What's your history with the industry, and what do you do now?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Ron. Well, first, my name is Joe. Ron said, my name is Joe Ghislain. I've been part of the Compressed Air Challenge, as Ron said, since its inception as the end user representative. So I come from a little bit different background in the compressed air industry. Since 97, I've been part of it and then became a fundamentals and advanced instructor. I was on the project development committee and on the committee that subcommittee that put together both the fundamentals and advanced training. And after probably about 10 years, I was also put on the board of directors because they wanted, again, the end user voice, because really the training was initially and still is driven towards the end users and helping the end users make their systems more efficient. But it has grown because, again, now it's becoming kind of an industry standard in the fact that everybody needs to go and have the training, and it's become the base of knowledge just for part of the CAGI compressed air system specialists and the certifications in the industry. So it's come a long way, and it's really made a market transformation. The whole intent and idea was to educate the end users to be able to go through and understand when somebody would come into their plant and they'd sell something, you'd want to go through and say, hey, that's good, that's not good. And I was having to do that well before the Compressed Air Challenge. When somebody would come in and it wouldn't make sense, I'd throw them out of my office and say, try again. So really that was the intent. And before that, there really was no training except for maybe a couple of sessions that the OEM manufacturers had, but nothing on systems. And so it was very important. And so a lot of the big stakeholders like Department of Energy, CAGI, many energy efficiency organizations, and people that were big stakeholders, consultants in the industry, they got together and said, we really need this kind of training. We really need that. And we're also trying to go through and make the U.S. industry more competitive, because one of the things we can do is become more efficient. So that's my background on the Compressed Air Challenge. As far as my history in the industry, again, I come from the end user. I spent over 31 years with Ford Motor Company in a number of different things. Prior to that, I was a maintenance and a licensed stationary engineer in a hospital. So I really went from the normal size compressors of 25, 50, 75 horse. We had that. We had vacuum systems and some nitrogen gen at the hospital. I went from that to being the boiler house chief at Chicago Stamping, Ford's plant, which was a 2 million square foot stamping facility, where the small air compressors we had, other than the control compressors, were 800 horsepower reciprocating compressors, 4,200 CFM. Had 3 of those, and then around the corner were the 10,000 CFM, 2 of those 2,500 horsepower, 13,200 volt direct drive. So all of a sudden I went to myself, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. You're in the big boy league. So I had a big shift in it. So really knowing compressors from one end to the other really helps. And again, at that time, there was nothing. And I had a lot of things where they didn't have maintenance. And when one of the compressors would go down, I'd have to bring in rental compressors. It would shut down production. And, people don't like it when you stop production in a facility. So I quickly had to learn about the equipment, about maintaining it, and about keeping everything up and running. So that was my lead into it. And then I also found out after the first shutdown, when I walked in through the plant and it sounded like a wind tunnel, that we had a huge air leak problem there. Matter of fact, it was over $1 million in air leak. Wow. And nobody actually brought it up until I went through and did it. So that was kind of my inroad into it. And then after that, I went to corporate as an energy engineer in the corporate offices for efficiency, and I became the global energy efficiency manager, and spent a lot of time then with all of the other pieces of equipment, rotary screws, most of it large, because between Ford and, our plants, they were big plants. So most of it was at large in the industry. And so I spent a lot of time doing that, a lot of time on the end use pieces of it and trying to go through and correct standards. So a lot of things, Ron, that we have on the inappropriate uses and reducing pressure and maintenance and the line sizing and the dirty 30 and all of that, that was my world. That was what I had to do to go through and do it. And you'd be surprised how many times that you have major issues that can go through and cause it. And so, I went back into production, first in the facility end and then actually in the production. Later in my career, towards the end of it, the last about third of it was with the supply base. I ran teams that worked on energy efficiency and operational efficiency in the supply base. And so we're trying to make them more efficient. And I saw a number of things that were compressed air really affect production. And you wouldn't catch it on a normal air audit because, again, you're not looking at the actual throughput and the quality of the product. So it is very important. And even though it may not be a big part of your energy, it has a large impact that you can have on production. So that's kind of where I learned mine, and why I joined the Compressed Air Challenge because training. I was all on the job. It was all working with it. As a matter of fact, probably a third of my fellow advanced instructors I worked with prior to either reviewing their studies at one of my plants, Ford plants, or going through and doing actual walkthroughs and audits with them. And I did a lot of walkthroughs and audits on my own, as the Ford corporate guy. We did a lot of internal auditing for efficiency and what's now known as Kaizens or energy treasure hunts. We were doing long before that was even considered a thing. So again, I come from a little bit different, but that's where I've gone through and been able to have my experience in it.
Sounds great. Yeah. What advice would you have for people who want to advance in the compressed air industry or the auditing industry?
That's a great question. I would definitely say understand the system, understand the end uses, understand what's driving it. As the powerhouse chief, I always said, you know what? If they don't use it, I don't have to make it. So when you get down to it, they're driving it. It drives the thing. That's why we look at pressure profiles. That's why we look at demands. It's the end uses that cause all of the things. I mean, if we didn't have them, it would be operating compressed air would be really, really easy. It would just be shut off. So really understanding that is important, and the interaction between it, because again, you need to understand that. And as many people find, not always does just the energy cost actually go through and sell a project. Many times it's issues that you have, problems you have. And so whether you're an end user or a distributor or an OEM rep that's helping end users or even utility people, going through and helping those end users solve their problems and work with them on what's wrong with the system, it's invaluable to them. It's invaluable to somebody like me that's an end user.
Yeah, very good, very good. One last question. If you had to list your choices of the most important points in the Compressed Air Challenge training material, what would they be and why?
Well, again, I think it's that interaction between supply and demand piece of it, because again, I can go through and put in the most efficient equipment of compressors and most efficient dryers. I can make my supply side really efficient. But if I have a 2-inch pipe leaking at the end of it, my system's never going to be efficient. If I have a ton of air leaks, if my system's driving things crazy, I'm never going to get it. Now, granted, I'll go through and tell you it is the hardest place to go through and make changes and go through and do anything with, because try to tell a production guy you want to change their production that they've been doing it that way for 20, 30 years. It isn't easy. So you really have to convince them, start with stuff small. So, and we talk about that in the training, and, maintenance, and again, coming from that O&M side, it's huge. It's understanding that and making sure you do it. and realizing that, that along with the compressed air and efficiency, that the end user has another, a lot to do. When somebody once asked me, Joe, what's it like to be Ford's global energy manager? I said, like selling ice cube to Eskimos. With the other 20 things they have to do now, I want them to save energy. So you have to integrate it into what you do. So I think those are the big pieces. We go over a lot of good, important things on both the supply and demand. And it really is understanding the whole big picture of it and going through and understanding it. And then if you're going in and auditing or being audited, when people find stuff, don't be upset about it, because they're coming in with fresh eyes. They're looking at one thing. It's not you're doing a bad job. I've always said, one thing's for sure. The compressed air systems are engineered and then they grow. After that, you never know what's going to happen. So you find the craziest things when you go into a plant, and it's like, what were they thinking? Well, they were just putting it in to get production running and keep things up and going, because that's the world they live in. They're in the firefighting road. So those are the things that, the compressed air challenge helps both sides understand, from the end users to the people that are helping them with implementation, with going through that, again, the end use people don't have a lot of time, and they don't, they're busy keeping the things running and keeping the widgets out the door, because that's what pays the bills.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Joe, for your great answers. There it is, folks. Be sure to join us for our next interview. And if you're interested in taking our great training, Joe mentioned quite a few highlights. Check out our calendar at the Compressed Air Challenge website, compressedairchallenge.org, and you'll be led to some information links about our upcoming training. So thanks very much, Joe, and we'll talk to you
Ron.
soon.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Barry.